icy cold waters of the Atlantic Ocean are getting hot, and how? The United States, in an overnight operation, has seized 2 oil tankers, one in the North Atlantic near Iceland, the other one near the Caribbean Sea. The one caught or seized near Iceland is Russia flagged, and the one that's caught near the Caribbean Sea was apparently a shadow tanker, a dark tanker carrying Venezuelan oil to China. Now, both the tankers were carrying Venezuelan oil, which is sanctioned by the United States. There is an embargo. It's interesting and a little curious how the 2 tankers could leave such heavily guarded waters, which are guarded both by the US Coast Guard and the US Navy, and reach this far. In fact, in the case of the merchant vessel Marinera, which is Russia flagged and was caught near Iceland by the US Navy with help from the United Kingdom Navy, the US Navy was on the chase, hot on the chase of this vessel for about 2 weeks, which shows that it was completely tracked, and both the sides were aware, because even in the case of the Russians, a submarine was closely following or shadowing this tanker which was carrying oil for Russia. Now, it's interesting why Russia, which itself has so much of energy, needs this oil from Venezuela, and that's where the whole geopolitics comes into play. Because remember, post the capture, abduction, kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela, by the United States, the US has been building, President Trump himself leading from the front, a scenario where they want to really grab Greenland from Denmark. And so they really want to show that the security of North Atlantic is compromised and they need to be there, and that's why they need Greenland. So maybe it's because of that, we don't know. But taken together, it's clear that in the case of merchant vessel Marinera and the merchant vessel Sophia, which was caught, a dark fleet caught from near Caribbean Sea, which was taking the oil to China, United States has made it amply clear, taken together all these actions, that when it comes to its neighborhood, the Western Hemisphere, the so-called Monroe or the latest Donroe doctrine, they are the boss, they are the mafioso. Because the first reaction that has come from Russia says that this is absolutely in breach of international marine law. Now, United States does not subscribe to it. There is something called UN clause, United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas. The US is not a signatory to it, and that's why they sort of, wherever their navy operates, they behave as if they are a law unto themselves, even in otherwise peace operations, more so in military operations. In this case, it's interesting that these shadow fleets are or have been working for Venezuela, and in fact, not for Venezuela, but carrying Venezuelan oil, but working for the likes of China and Russia. Are we really building up to a situation where there could be a military confrontation? We don't know, because remember, in this case also, there was a Russian submarine that was closely tracking and following merchant vessel Marinera, but it did not act. It let the Americans seize the ship, and which is now being towed to British waters. And in the case of Sophia, it's being taken to the US coast, and of course, no confrontation whatsoever from China. But what is clear is that there is one set of rules for rest of the world and another rule or rules when it comes to United States. Because remember, this action by the US comes on a day when President Trump has announced that US would be purchasing about $2 billion worth of oil from Venezuela, and about 30 to 50 million barrels or whatever. But there is no problem if the US takes that oil, but if the rest of the world takes it, then of course Uncle Sam gets itchy. That's coming out of this. But for how long rest of the world, specifically equivalent powers like China and Russia, are going to tolerate it is the question. And if not, then are we looking at a situation where, if inadvertently so, a military action pans out, say in this case between the Russian naval ships that were tracking the merchant vessel and the US Coast Guard or US Navy, then are we looking at a flashpoint? Because remember, when it comes to India, Pakistan, India, China, the West is always edgy about the geography becoming a flashpoint. What about this case? So are we looking at the possibility of Third World War panning out in case of any irresponsible act triggering a military conflict between these powers? Is something which we have to watch out for.